And I want to welcome everyone to the National Museum of American History's Colloquium Series, Pandemic Perspectives. I'm Alexandra Lord, and I'm the chair and curator of our Division of Medicine and Science here at the National Museum of American History. We're really excited to share this series with you. We're doing these discussions as part of our traditional colloquium, which we hold every Tuesday at the museum. And because we're historians, because we know that you all love history as much as we do, we thought we would start by just sharing a little bit about the history and the structure of our colloquium, which is open to the general public. We've moved to Zoom in the era of COVID-19, so we're able to share it much more widely than we normally do. So our colleague, David Haberstich, who's a curator of photography in our Archive Center, runs this fantastic series. So he's going to introduce you to its history. So David, if I can just have you give us a little background on the colloquium, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lexi. Yes, welcome to this very special edition of the Tuesday Colloquium. The NMAH Tuesday Colloquium is nearly 40 years old. Dr. Paul Foreman, former curator of physics, founded the series in an effort to, quote, raise the intellectual tone of the museum. And he was its first coordinator. Around the time that the Museum of History and Technology became the National Museum of American History in 1980. Subsequently, other curators took turns serving as colloquium coordinator. I've been doing this for 16 years with the help of my colleague Roger Sherman, and together we've run well over 600 programs in the series. But today we begin a very exciting variation of this program, and I'm just delighted. It's quite different from our normal procedure of a single speaker or maybe a couple of speakers interacting with prepared presentations. So please take it away.
Thanks, David. I really appreciate that. So, like everyone on this call, we've been thinking a lot about COVID-19 over the last few months. And as the nation's largest history museum, we're tasked with collecting objects that reflect the American experience. And in the past, this led our curators to collect some amazing objects related to 19th and 20th century epidemics and pandemics. And now with COVID-19, our curators and our collection specialists here at the museum have focused on collecting objects related to the ongoing pandemic. But we've also been thinking a lot about the objects that are already in our collections. In fact, when we looked at our existing collections, we discovered many objects that we feel can provide us with some insight into what all of us are experiencing today. So we're looking forward to sharing some of these objects with you over the course of this series. That said, you'll help us as well. We're searching for objects that tell the story of COVID-19, and we rely on donations and offers from Americans like yourself. So we'd like to ask if you would contact us with any objects which you feel reflect your COVID-19 story. We ask that you use our email, covid19@si.edu. All you need to do is send us a picture of the object and just a brief description of it. And we're looking forward tremendously from hearing from you. So before we begin, I just want to do some quick housekeeping issues. First, we very much want this to be a discussion. So we hope that you'll join us in asking questions of our speakers at any point. And to ask a question, you just need to go to the Q&A bar at the bottom of the screen, just type in your question. Second, if you're not already doing this, we recommend that you click on the speaker view icon. It's in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And you can put the screen on side-by-side gallery, and that will enable you to see both the speakers and the images that we're going to share with you. And you'll see that we have already closed captioning for today's event. We're not, as you know, we're historians, so we are not IT people, so we're not able to help you if you're having some technical issues related to Zoom. If you are having problems, we ask that you just sign off and then try signing in again. But if that doesn't work, we're going to upload our videos onto our website so you can watch this more easily on the museum's website if you're having problems today. And finally, before I introduce our three speakers, I just want to remind you that our next colloquium will be held on Tuesday, October 6th. That's also going to be at 4 p.m. East Coast time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. West Coast. And that's titled Pandemic Pursuits, How Your Ancestors Had Fun at Home. It's a little more lighthearted topic than today, but we hope you'll join us then as well. Obviously, Zoom colloquium were not one of the ways that your ancestors had fun at home, but we definitely think this is a great way to have a fun and interesting time at home. So now I'm really pleased to introduce our panel of distinguished scholars. Dr. Theodore S. Gonzalez is a curator here at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. The author of multiple works, Dr. Gonzalez has been the recipient of senior fellowships at the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, and the U.S. Fulbright Commission. Dr. Gonzalez served as the 21st president of the Association for Asian American Studies. Erica Lee is a Regents Professor of History and Asian American Studies and the director of the Immigration History Research Center at the University of Minnesota. The granddaughter of Chinese immigrants, Professor Lee is the author of 4 award-winning books, and she was recently elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Natalia Molina is a professor in the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. She's also the author of 2 award-winning books, as well as the recipient of multiple national fellowships and awards, including awards and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Mellon Foundation. So welcome to our speakers. We're really pleased to have you all here. Coming to us from the Midwest and the West Coast, and joining us here on the East Coast. We think it's especially apropos for us to talk about this issue of the concept of scapegoating now, because yesterday was the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, and traditionally a key aspect of Yom Kippur entailed the sacrifice of 2 goats, and one of those goats had the sins of the community symbolically placed upon it. The goat was then thrown from a rocky cliff, and in doing that throwing, the community cast out their sins. So scapegoats originally took on the sins of a community, and I think that raises for us some really interesting and provocative questions for us as we think about the origins of the term scapegoat and the idea of racism as America's original sin. So one of the questions I want us to sort of have in the back of our mind throughout this discussion is this question of what's the sin with which those who are characterized as scapegoats are seen as having. And this idea of sin, I think, is a really provocative idea. But what I thought we'd start with is an object, and if I can ask you, Megan, to move to the first object in our collection, which is slide right here. Great, thank you. So this is an object that Dr. Gonzalez was thinking to bring into our museum. And so I thought it might make sense for us just to talk about objects that we're currently bringing in with COVID-19 as we think about this issue of scapegoating before we jump in to look at our historic collections. And so I'm wondering if our speakers have anything to say about sort of why this object and what can it tell us about what's happening today? What will future researchers think about when they're looking at an object like this?
So Lexi, I'll be happy to jump in since I'm going to be collecting this object on behalf of the museum. And thank you for the introduction, for the invitation to join you today. And thank you, David, for putting together this series for so many years. It's been wonderful to see your stewardship to bring these conversations to the museum community and beyond. I'm happy to join this panel with Natalia and Erica. I think this banner can help us start off a conversation with hopefully getting us into the context of what pandemics mean in our various communities. And so we'll just start with the idea that as the shutdown happened, those of us inside the museum were tasked with the idea of how to go about collecting. Collecting and accessioning objects to the museum is usually something that's done on the ground. It could be done as quickly as a phone call or a handshake, but it could also take years in the making. And it it can also involve the long haul, developing those community-based relationships and longer conversations that span months, if not years. And so in the middle of this pandemic taking place in early March, when the museum had shut down as with the rest of the Smithsonian, there were a handful of us that were tasked with thinking about how to collect from various communities. And so I focus on Asia Pacific America history at the museum, as well as performing arts and culture. And so I reached out to friends and colleagues in the San Francisco Bay Area and was able to get a hold of a retired judge by the name of Julie Tang, who was a Superior Court justice there on the bench for about 14 years. She's also a community organizer. And she told me about a banner that came from a rally that took place in February. I'll talk more about that date in a little bit, but the idea is that this banner was part of a rally that took place in San Francisco's Chinatown. And it focused on well, the rally had about 1,000 attendees. And we can talk about the 20-foot banner that's there right up front. And the very, you can see there in the center, it says, "Fight the virus, not the people." And there are two lines of Chinese text that a friend and colleague by the name of Joanna Lee helped to translate for me. And together it says, "Together we support the businesses, we are against discrimination, and we support fighting the global pandemic, add oil." And so by add oil, that's supposedly a famous Chinese idiom that talks about keep it going, keep it up with determination and courage. So what's interesting to me about this particular object is the timing of the rally. The rally was held in San Francisco Chinatown on Saturday, February 29th of this year. So that's 11 days before the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. But February 29th is also the date of the first recorded death in the United States due to COVID-19. What's interesting as well to me is the fact that this Chinatown community understands not only what's happening at the time, but also is able to think about the history, the long legacy of pandemics in its city. They've been here before in this particular situation, as it were, and these communities have stood at the crossroads of discrimination, health, and public policy before. So it's interesting to me in terms of how this community recognizes the very crisis of the time, as well as understanding what the last century meant, the last 150 years mean. And I think what's fascinating about having Erica Lee here and Natalia Molina here is the fact that they can help us situate these histories that go back to the 19th century, and not just for Asian American and Chinese American communities, but also to see how these histories also impact other communities coming from the Philippines, from Latin America, from Mexico. And so this is really quite an interesting way to kind of think about the use of this banner as a portal into other stories that are deeply American stories about health, public policy, and discrimination. So I'd love for either Erica or Natalia to get into it, because I think Erica wrote a fantastic book about the centennial of the founding of Angel Island Detention Center, and her grandfather was a detainee there. So these are very much personal stories as well as deeply historicized stories about how each of us are thinking about objects such as these.
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in, and thank you so much for that, for bringing us all together, and that great introduction of this phenomenal artifact. You know, the thing I love about this photograph, and also the context in which it is originates, is this date. This is, as Theo mentioned, it's before the WHO had identified COVID-19 as a global pandemic. And before we hit all of us, right? You know, we didn't really shut down as a society until mid-March, yet we see how early Chinese Americans are feeling the impact of the virus, partly because of the history, partly because they are connected transnationally to families and communities in China, but also because the xenophobia that has arisen out of COVID-19 was already global before we really experienced the pandemic ourselves. there has been long-standing messages about disease being particularly something that Chinese spaces incubate, that Chinese people spread either because of their unsanitary living conditions or especially the weird exotic food that Asians allegedly eat. And, you know, there are these viral videos about Asian people eating bat soup, and then that is how the virus, you know, leapt to humans. So this banner shows the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 has had on particular communities. In this case, it's the Chinese American community, but we know from all of the health and economic statistics the impact that it has had on indigenous, African American, immigrant and refugee communities. The other thing about this banner is that it is, you know, absolutely situated in historic Chinatown. This is Grant Avenue in San Francisco, highly, you know, not only a community space, but also one that is a big tourist attraction. And it is a symbol of community resistance. This is something that we've known that marginalized communities have always been at the forefront of demanding equality and civil rights. But I think especially in the past 4 years, we have seen activism at a scale that has not often been matched in history. So I think this is just a wonderful way to start the conversation.
I'm wondering, Megan, if you could go to slides 6 and 7 and 8, if we could share those with our audience, and as well as 9. And I'm wondering if we could think a little bit about some of these historic images which have demonized different ethnic and racial groups. And I'm wondering if we could talk about sort of this connection with disease and what drives the emergence of this imagery, the idea of the immigrant as always diseased, and how widespread was this imagery? You can see here, obviously they're carrying disease into the country. If you want to go to the next slide as well, that would be great, Megan. So I'm wondering if you all could talk a little bit about that connection, especially between immigrants and disease, which is just so deep in American history.
Go ahead and get started. So I think one thing that we're seeing in these images is this idea that it's not just policy that shapes our ideas about immigration or affects our ideas about immigration, and not just immigration law, but also our concepts of health, both at a policy level in terms of such as medical inspections, but also at a cultural level in the stories we tell about race. And so in all these slides, what you see is this way in which our way of understanding race was not just about who was, you know, fit to be a citizen or who was fit to be a worker, but it was also the ways in which conceptions of health played into that, in terms of who we could trust to be a worker, who we could trust to let into the United States to be a laborer and not end up being dependent. Those concepts don't just end at the point of the medical inspection, whether it be through Ellis Island, El Paso on the US-Mexico border, or Angel Island. It continues to follow these immigrants through the rest of their lives and even on to the next generation. So even if they are accepted into the country, it ends up affecting what jobs they can have, where they can live in the city, whether their children are allowed to go to school with children outside of their ethnic or racial background. And so, you know, we see, for example, in this one, you know, this is a very popular one from the San Francisco WASP, or about San Francisco in the WASP magazine in 1882. So the location lets us know that really they're talking about Asian immigrants, and at this point, Chinese immigrants. And so that's why they're also holding that little sash on the side, the Chinatown. And so it's this constant reminder and justification for why immigration laws need to be passed. So 1882, we know that's when the Chinese Exclusion Act passes. And so it's not just strict laws that shape our perceptions about race, but the stories that we tell about race. And much of them are influenced by medical racial profiling.
Lexi, could I
Can I add
follow
just
up with
a
that?
few?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Eric.
Just a few details. One is that this is published May 26, 1882. This is 3 weeks after the Exclusion Act is passed, exactly 3 weeks. And then the other thing about these illustrations that we've scrolled through is these are not exceptions. These are not extreme magazines or journals. These are mainstream, highly popular. The WASP in particular was California and the West leading illustrated magazine. They were known for innovating in their color lithography. Ironically, it's owned by an immigrant from Czechoslovakia, and the artist who helps to make the WASP's anti-Chinese cartoons so effective is also an immigrant from Prussia. But these are mainstream images, and they have so much power during this time.
I'd like to add another thought here that picks up on both of your comments. And Megan, if we could have slide number 27, please. Our audience might think that I'm just making up the fact that there's a person named Megan, but there really is a person named Megan.
Are you able, Megan, to move to? Well, maybe we could just describe the image, Theo, if you want to do that. That'd be great.
It's the cover of a magazine, another one that was also quite popular, and following up just right on what Erica was talking about. This was very much in the popular imagination. This is not a fringe element kind of publication. This was very much in the public air. This was very much the air that people were breathing, the kinds of magazines that people were consuming on a daily and a weekly basis. We're moving the timeline just a little bit forward here from the 1800s, 1882 to 1899, and puts us right into the Spanish-American War and directly into what becomes the US-Philippine War while it is taking place. And here I'd like to point out the fact that President McKinley at the time, who's now 2 years into his presidency, is in the middle of conducting a war. He's washing a quote unquote Filipino native in the waters of civilization. You may not be able to see the text there, but the waters spell out civilization. And just in the tiny details of that sponge, he's washing that Filipino baby with a sponge, and on the edge of the sponge, it says education. In the background, so that's the foreground image, but in the background, you'll see two persons that are putting on clothes. So they're a little bit ahead of the washing. And so it seems like they've been properly groomed and cleaned. But they're also carrying the banners of where they are from Cuba and Puerto Rico. And so this gives us an idea about not only a crisis of disease, but also the idea of how health and purity is related to how a nation and a culture understood what it meant to be civilized. There were certain people who were deemed to be impure or filthy or dirty. And so these kinds of popular images help to reinforce those kinds of notions. And again, this is right in the middle of a war that is taking place. So when you think about how Americans are consuming their news, how do they understand people from far off places? We're not talking about a time in which migration has been solidified for Filipinos coming to the United States. So the popular imagination still really doesn't have an idea about even what a Filipino looks like. But here, these images of Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Filipinos are interpolated or brought together in one frame. And it's all about, for a very specific purpose, to have them washed and prepared for civilization. I think it's a very powerful image and I hope folks can really dig into its meaning.
Also, we have a couple questions from our audience, so I just want to pass them on. So to what extent were eugenicist ideas also informing these discourses?
Very, very much. It's one of the main institutions, fields of knowledge, knowledge formation that is informing our ideas about race. And this is why we also need to think about race relationally, not just how it affects one group, but then how that sets the stage, sets the script for how it affects groups afterwards. So, going back to Dr. Gonzalez's example of connecting the anti-Chinese cartoon to the anti-Filipino cartoon. When we think about that for eugenics, we can think about justifications for slavery and the ways in which science was used to justify a forced labor force in terms of saying their bodies were suited for it, in terms of saying their intelligence was not. And so we see these same arguments applied in the late 19th century for immigration, into the 20th century, and again, following those immigrants into other parts of their lives. So we see IQ tests, and I know we have some slides related to that if you'd like to bring it up in terms of like the face puzzle or any of the kind of Ellis Island related images. That would be a good transition to it if you want to do that. But it wasn't just people's bodies that were being judged when they were coming in through Ellis Island. It was also their minds, who was considered feeble-minded, what kind of tests they would give them, and, without regard for things like cultural differences or even language differences. And you see this a lot in Ellis Island, where some of the earliest IQ tests are done. And you see this a lot against immigrants that we now think about as white, in terms of, Irish and Italian particularly, but also Jews coming through Ellis Island. So, these kind of mental exams, right? So what are they telling us if they are accepted? That they will be accepted as laborers, but not really ever culturally in the same way as other Americans.
I have another question that I just want to throw out to our panel, which is that on this topic of scapegoating. Do any of you have any thoughts about the QAnon phenomenon and the impact that conspiracy theories might have at this time, dividing our population in the way that other conversations in the late 19th century also divided up the population?
Can I follow up on what Natalia just said first?
Sure.
In terms of the relationship between eugenics and immigration restriction. This might also be a good time to bring up the two slides related to the Ku Klux Klan, because the other side of this is not only identifying who are the ultimate outsiders, right? The ones that absolutely should not be part of the body politic, but also identifying who are the ultimate insiders, right? The ideal citizen, the ideal white Anglo-Saxon Protestant citizen. And in this way, we see not only eugenics being used to support restriction, right? Managing the population through restricting who can come in and who cannot, managing the population in terms of who can become a naturalized citizen, but also managing the population to enforce racial segregation, to maintain white supremacy. The Ku Klux Klan, as we more commonly know, organized campaigns of racial terror, lynching, but also are highly, anti-Semitic and anti-immigrant. I know that we have here the membership card from 1926. There's also a photograph of a Klan hood. When I was researching my book on xenophobia, one of the most telling pieces that I came across was a 1920s pamphlet that was titled "America for Americans," and it had an image of a Klan member in a robe and astride a similarly, I don't know if you can see this, but astride a similarly clad horse, carrying a huge American flag, and the title was America for Americans. So we need to protect and maintain an America for Americans, meaning Klan members, against the foreign flood of foreigners. The other thing that I thought might be helpful when we're talking about this relationship between race, eugenics, and disease, I pulled up the text of the 1891 Immigration Act. This is the first time or first law that grants the US government the power to deny entry to foreign nationals based on health grounds. And there are several categories of exclusion. There's persons suffering from loathsome or dangerous contagious diseases. Also those who have trachoma, FAVus, venereal disease, parasitic infections, tuberculosis. In 1903, the Public Health Service defined hernias, heart disease, pregnancy, poor physique, chronic rheumatism, nervous affections, malignant diseases, deformity, senility, debility, varicose veins, and poor eyesight as constituting physical and mental defects that would impact a person's ability to make a living. So the clause likely to become a public charge, which has come up in recent public policy. So we used a really broad range of definitions to identify disease, disease in the past to justify restriction.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have another question, sort of really just tallies with what some of you are saying. We're talking about how individuals were trying to limit entry into the US. And the question that I have from the audience is, if these caricatures were fairly mainstream, how prominent were activists and activist media which countered the xenophobia and racism of this time? What's the flip side? How are immigrants pushing back against this kind of vilification, these specific communities?
It's very uneven. Natalia, do you want to start and then I can follow up?
I'll set the stage for you, Dr. Lee, because I know I think there's so many great examples within the Chinese and Chinese American community in terms of kind of organized response. I think one thing is that we're also remembering for a lot of these immigrant communities, these are the earliest generations. So, they don't have the protection of citizenship. So they sometimes have language barriers. They're, poor, working class. And so there's a way in which we're not going to be able to talk about activism in those ways. That being said, what people could do, they would do. They found ways from, filing petitions, from suing, from forming organizations, from trying to break into unions, from returning back home. There were lots of ways in which we see that immigrants responded. If you look at court cases, but if you even look at like city council petitions, and in my work, what I've seen in that is that you also see allies forming. So, when we think back at that opening image of Chinatown and the banner, we also know that, neighborhoods aren't just concrete, there aren't discrete bubbles around them. And so we see the ways in which immigrants may have met people at work, or that they might have been their neighbors, or that they worked for them. And so that they might have formed allies with them. And you also see some of their, white or Black neighbors, co-workers, colleagues, supporting them in petitions, supporting them in court. And so there are ways in which people fought back. I think that is one of the things that's really different today about the internet and the way that people can organize, right? I mean, Black Lives Matter starts as a hashtag. So, it's not the same scale, but it is certainly there. Where you find people pushing down and trying to keep groups down, you will also find resistance.
Yeah, I would just add that the big difference between today and back then is, with all of the protests organized around the most recent immigration policies, the Muslim ban, child separation, et cetera, when I've gone out and participated the range of diverse peoples, and allyship is truly something phenomenal to see, but also as a historian, I know is rather new. I like to think back to previous laws that we now understand as egregious and discriminatory, and know that there were not nationwide protests when the Chinese Exclusion Act was signed. There were not nationwide protests when Executive Order 9066 was signed that allowed for the incarceration of Japanese Americans, nor were there nationwide protests when Mexican and Mexican Americans were forcibly removed during the Great Depression. So that is something that has absolutely changed.
I have an interesting question, which is someone is asking, I wonder if the Smithsonian is considered flipping perspectives on this interesting topic and collecting possible European images of, quote, dirty Americans these days, given the EU's restrictions on Americans entering Europe. And I'm wondering, I don't think we've been thinking especially about that. I don't know if you've had thoughts on it, Theo, or Professor Lee or Professor Molina, if you have suggestions of what we should be thinking about in that regard.
Well, this is a great moment to collect that kind of object, because what it does is it helps to spell out what the opinion of the rest of the world is about America and Americans. These bans on immigration to Europe and even to Canada by Americans or U.S. citizens, I should say, is really a fascinating turn. And I think for a lot of people who take their citizenship for granted, it's another mode of destabilizing or decentering their sense of what America has been, a constantly mobile, a constantly free people, a people that's able to travel without restrictions. But here's a major population bloc in an economic and political organization, the European Union, that has said that Americans or US citizens are barred from entry. So I think it's giving a lot of people some interesting pause. So I'd be up for it. I think it's something I haven't really heard internally in NMH us considering, but I think it's definitely something we should.
I think we should meet right after this session, you and I.
Oh, another Zoom meeting. Yes. Okay.
Right. But Professor.
Yes, when the EU, when news came that the EU was deliberate about putting Americans on this ban, I was inspired to write an op-ed that I think the subtitle is "Americans are the dangerous disease-carrying foreigners now," and to remark on this ironic turn that for centuries we have identified every other group as not fit into our country, but yet now we are the ones who are targeted. I also have found it fascinating, maybe this is a collection tip or hint, I found it fascinating in juxtaposing this rhetoric that Americans are the ones who are the most diseased with the official and even popular understandings of these travel bans. So travel sites will simply call them travel advisories. It's not about American bans, right? It's about, you should be advised that you cannot travel to any of these countries. So it is framed in a way that is very benign, that is very non-threatening or non-insulting to Americans, right? But if we were to, get a hold of some of those internal discussions of the government agencies that are instituting these travel bans, that would be, fascinating rhetoric to see how Americans are being seen around the country. I think the difference here is that I'm not sure that it would have the same racial connotations that we've seen in the past, right? Chinese, Filipinos, Mexicans are diseased because of their race. It's something about them genetically, biologically, versus today, it's probably related to the failures of our federal government, right? Or our freedom-loving resistance to wearing masks. It's not going to be connected racially in the same way that it has been in the past, or that it continues to be with certain groups like the Chinese who brought the Chinese virus to the United States.
I'm wondering if, Megan, if you could go to slide 13. We've been talking about that, policing the borders. And I'm wondering if you all could talk a little bit about differences between ways in which immigrants were treated at our borders. So if we looked at sort of slide 13 and some of the tests that immigrants were underwent. I mean, first of all, was there a difference for how immigrants were treated?
Let me cue up Erica for this, because her book on Angel Island really gets us to this, where we think about how Chinese were treated in a certain way, and if you're other kinds of immigrants, let's say Polish and others, you were taken to a different kind of gate, and you were held in a different manner. But she could explain this in terms of the physicality of Angel Island. I mean, it's a tiny island in San Francisco Bay. And it was in existence for 40 years. So Eric, I'd love for you to explain just the physicality of how people would come, especially in those years after the Chinese Exclusion Act. What did that mean for Chinese to be held differently as opposed to European immigrants who are also coming through the similar detention center?
And Mexicans as well. And this would be a great reminder that the hospital building at the Angel Island Immigration Station has just been renovated. There are new exhibits. We were actually supposed to celebrate its reopening this past Saturday. It is now a virtual reopening, but this is specifically, the history of border policing and disease and health examinations. And I can do more than just give you some a brief history lesson on how immigrants were examined. We've been routing through the museum's attics. Well, I decided to bring a little show and tell myself. You can't see this so well, but this is a copy of my grandfather's immigration file from the National Archives in San Bruno, California. He entered through Angel Island. He had to answer 200 plus questions about his right to enter the country. His father also had to answer a similar number of questions about his right to enter the country. He also went through a very detailed medical exam. And frankly, after looking at close to 1,000 of these immigration files, I have not seen one that is as detailed as this. There was concern that Chinese immigrants, because the laws were so restrictive, that there were many who were coming without proper documentation. And they were right to be suspicious. My grandfather was coming as what we call as a paper son. So he was coming in as the son of someone who was already a legal permanent resident and could sponsor in family. This person was not my grandfather's real father. He was an orphan. And immigration officials were suspicious. So they sent him, after all of these interrogations, they sent him to the doctor to do a very thorough medical exam to determine whether my grandfather was the age that he claimed to be. And in 1918, the report came back from the medical division on Angel Island. And the doctor wrote that he had examined the alien and found that a correlation of those features which aid in the estimation of age. So he's looking at hair, skin, facial, pubic, genitals, the eruption and development of the teeth, the development of sexual organs, the facial expression, the general attitude, to determine what he thought, is he the age that he claimed? Is he really 17 years old or not? These are some of the invasive kinds of exams that were used, similarly to the one that we see on the screen, that were not applied to every immigrant and every immigrant group equally. They were specifically and deliberately applied to groups that were considered undesirable and dangerous, and these medical decisions were used as an additional way to justify exclusion.
So I'm curious,
Can I, oh,
I was just going to say, Megan, can you go to slides 18, 19, and 20 so we can see a little bit about sort of the public nature of these exams as well? And Professor Molina, sorry.
let me give you a contrasting example to Dr. Lee's. So I also have my grandmother's immigration file from 100 years ago, and she had none of this. She was a Mexican immigrant. She was rare in that she was a woman who crossed. And so their concerns were not about her body as a disease-carrying body, but as a woman crossing on her own as an amoral body. You know, was she married? Who would she be with? This kind of thing. There were no exams. Why? Because this was in the 1920s when Mexican labor was needed. And so does that mean that everybody was wholeheartedly accepting of Mexican labor? No. And people made arguments about it. They're too different than us. They're more indigenous, you know, just like our Native Americans. And yet large-scale employers, especially around agriculture, around railroads, said, that's why we want them. They are different than us. They can withstand that 110-degree heat and work those fields, just as they are today, even during COVID and even during firefighters here, you know, fire season here in California. And so they made these arguments that because they were biologically different, that Mexican immigrants were actually the labor force that we wanted. Then, you know, there's changes like the 1924 Immigration Act, changes in labor needs, and then the Depression, as Dr. Lee referenced earlier in the 1930s. And Mexicans become the economic scapegoat for much of that in terms of immigrant labor that we don't need, and they're here taking our jobs. And it's not just an economic one, but now the medical argument comes in. And now the medical argument is they're more prone to disease. They might, you know, they contract tuberculosis more easily. And so they start getting deported. And some of those deportation centers are even set up in hospitals, public hospitals, because again, referring to what Dr. Lee said in terms of the likely to become a public charge, using a hospital service or a burial service provided by the county is seen as taking welfare. So we start deporting Mexicans. Again, we have change in our labor needs, World War II, and now we have a labor shortage again. And so what you're seeing here is this slide of Mexicans being inspected to come back to the United States. So even as the guest worker program, the Bracero program, starts in 1942, the deportations aren't officially over. They're certainly not at the peak, but they're not officially over. And yet we begin to bring Mexicans back as guest workers, workers who came back year after year, decade after decade. Sometimes then their children grow up to also become braceros. Never offering them citizenship, just offering them a job here for a while and then sending them back. But that narrative of this is a scary group who's biologically different than us and who's prone to disease had already taken hold. So what do? You say, well, we're going to inspect them. And so they had to go through rigorous inspections to become braceros, to show that they would be suitable laborers. The sad part was once they got to the US and worked in these dangerous jobs, in these rigorous jobs, they weren't provided the housing, room and board and medical treatment that was guaranteed in the contracts oftentimes, and sometimes not even, you know, all of their wages. And so we see that the medical narrative around them was really meant to protect their US employers rather than the workers themselves.
So I just want to go back to, there's a report today, this is a question from our audience in the news about alleged unsanctioned sterilizations at some of our borders. And the author or the questioner is asking, were these extreme and unnecessary measures also used previously?
So I'll link that back to the question earlier about eugenics. And so one thing that we've mentioned in our responses has been that these kinds of attitudes towards immigrants don't just end at the border. They also continue to shape the way that they lead their lives in terms of, you know, what jobs they were eligible for, where they could live, where they could work. And so we also see that feeble-mindedness that marks them at the border ends up marking them as they continue through their lives. So anytime that these charges of, being feeble-minded or too sexual or too this or too that, one of the ways to contain them once they were already here in the US and even second generation was to label them feeble-minded. So there's been a lot of work by people like Alexandra Mina Stern at the University of Michigan and Miroslava Chavez Garcia at UC Santa Barbara, looking at the role of mental health hospitals in also, deeming them as unfit, as feeble-minded, as the term of the day, in quotes, moron, as another way that just to show that they were not full citizens, not just their bodies, but also their minds. And, many of these sterilizations were legal. So California, was was the state that performed the most sterilizations over, between around 1909 legally into the 60s. There's a wonderful documentary called No Más Bebés, No More Babies. That's about the sterilizations that took place even after this was illegal in the 1970s at LA County Hospital. And so we keep seeing this cyclical pattern come up. And it's usually when we don't deem those immigrants as being worthy or as being part of our America.
So one of the questions that we just got was, to what degree was the policing of women different from men, especially at the border, especially with this idea of women as able to reproduce, or the very different standards that we have for behavior for men and women?
I could talk a little bit about different ports of entry, and then maybe hand it over to Dr. Molina. One of the things that is so fascinating about the gap between what is actual immigration policy and then how it is enforced is revealed when we look at the differences between immigrant inspections of men versus women. On Angel Island, a place that was a gateway to America, specifically from across the Pacific, but had people from around the world, the ways in which immigrant inspectors measured the morality or immorality of certain immigrants was always highly gendered. So if you look at the immigration files and the questions that immigrant inspectors are asking of women of every nationality, women are asked about any premarital sex relations, whether they have been promiscuous, and of course men are never asked these questions at all. Women are judged if they arrive pregnant, whether they will be able to support themselves. Men as parents are not asked those questions. So this gap in terms of who is the moral and who is the immoral woman is especially apparent at these ports of entry. But it's also about this concern that the immigrant women are breeding at a rate than white US citizen women, who are also being blamed because they are doing silly things like getting an education and working outside the home, and the birth rate of white so-called native children is going down. It's what some eugenicists and politicians and other thinkers are calling the race suicide of white Americans. And so these two messages about undesirable immigrant women coming in and overbreeding, and white native American women not doing their part and having enough children, is working together to support xenophobia and racism and white supremacy during this time period.
So we're about 5 minutes out from the conclusion. This has been a really fascinating discussion, and I want to thank our speakers. And I'm curious if you all just could add some just overall comments about some of the things that you think the discussion today has raised, or ways that we should be thinking about how our past is really shaping, obviously, our future, our present day, the ways in which these lingering ideas still shape our present. And I'm thinking to some degree about this, going back to this banner that Theo was looking at collecting.
Sure. Let me kick things off then. Again, it's been an honor being on this panel with Dr. Molina and Dr. Lee. What I think anyone who's working in this area will appreciate is the fact that that history does more than repeat itself, and if it doesn't repeat itself, it's certainly rhyming. There's certainly the echo and the traces of the past in everything that we find in the present, and so these time periods and these laws and these prescriptions and these anxieties that seem to be so far away and so far gone really do have their echoes in a distant past. It doesn't begin with ethnic and racial minorities. I think that's one thing that I'd like for audience members to take away. I think there's the general idea that people of color, especially ethnic and racial minorities, are seemingly obsessed with identity and can't stop talking about such things. But if we go back to the 1790 Naturalization Act, we have to think about how that was a law that equated citizenship with free white persons of good moral character. When we think about the policing of bodies in terms of how we think about diseased bodies, and it's not just a physical characteristic, but from the very foundation of the country, it was also thinking about its moral characteristics as well. And so we have to think about who was really identifying and who was really obsessed with identities. And it's clearly the founders themselves. It's clearly the so-called Americans who set up their governments here. They were the ones that were obsessed with identities. It's been an obsession. Of course, it's going to be an obsession because it's on stolen land. And everything follows from that. So we're following in the great tradition of America, which is to be obsessed with these questions of identity. The other thing that I'd want to close with is this idea that all these prescriptions and acts of policing are in many ways capricious. We're finding the most vulnerable people running into the buzzsaw of power at the most inopportune time. They're recruited here for cheap labor because they're needed at a certain time, and then they're repulsed and they're expelled when they are deemed inconvenient. And so we find that this is nothing new in many communities, whether it's on reservations or in major cities or at the border, to be attracted by capital, but then also to be expelled when they're deemed not necessary. And these tools of using science is nothing new. And unfortunately, it continues to this day. So I hope we become better and more critical consumers of history to understand the present. Thank you again.
Professor Lee?
I'd like to circle back to the question that you first asked about what we can all do, what we could all be doing, and especially what the museum might be thinking about in terms of collecting during this time. It's so important to be documenting the impact of COVID, the disproportionate impact of COVID on, I think, especially immigrant and refugee communities. As Dr. Molina pointed out, they are essential workers. I don't mean that they're not essential, but they're essential workers in terms of the label, but they are not treated as essential. They are disproportionately in occupations and in industries that put them at greater health and economic risk. And we need to be collecting their stories and documenting this impact. The Immigration History Research Center at the University of Minnesota, which I direct, we're going to be launching next week an immigrant COVID project that is documenting the impact in terms of news, research, reports, perspectives, and we're collecting COVID, what we're calling COVID immigrant stories. But I think the artifacts and the art and the creative work that people are producing also need to be collected and preserved so that we can be able to, the historians in 100 years, they'll be able to have, who knows, probably not going to be Zoom, some sort of way to have this conversation, but we need to have those objects available for them.
And Professor Molina?
We were just talking about the Smithsonian, completely unrelated to this presentation, just with friends, socially distanced outside. Remembering my husband's first trip to Washington, D.C., I was giving a talk at the Smithsonian. We were only there for like 2 full days, and he spent his entire first day, even after a red eye, at the Smithsonian, at one of the museums. You know, and I was thinking about why is that we love museums? And it's because they offer us a vehicle to gain insight into someone else's experience. They make it less foreign, less distance, and less frightening. And this connection is the first in meaningful dialogue, one in which we're willing to listen to one another as well as communicate our ideas. And this is the keystone to democracy. And I hope what people saw today is that, you know, we have our opinions, we have our analysis, but, you know, we use evidence, we analyze it, and then we show how these concepts change over time. Nothing is stable. And so we all have to have these critical thinking skills in order to tell our own stories and to connect with one another.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our speakers. It's really been a wonderful event, and it's been great to have this discussion. And I do know that we were not able to get to everyone's questions. So if you do still have questions, please feel free to email us at that covid19@si.edu. And we'll be happy to pass them on to our panelists who may be able to answer your questions. But thank you so much for joining us, and we hope we'll hear from you. We'd love to hear your COVID-19 story. So please contact us with any objects that you feel really illustrate and give insight into the experience of living during this pandemic. So thank you, and we hope we'll see you on October 6th.